Okay. I think we're there on YouTube now, perhaps. And let's let our audience in. Okay. I think we're there on YouTube now, perhaps. And I gotta figure out how to let's let our audience in. Okay. We are live. People just filtering now, I see. We have some attendees here. Thanks for joining us. Okay, I think we're set to go. Welcome, everyone. Happy New Year. I know it's a little late in the new year for the Friday webinar. Thanks for hanging on for the past 5 weeks while we took a little break and taking care of some other things in the CC office. I'm Executive Director Derek Auger. Welcome to the Friday webinar. We try to do this every Friday, and we will now from now until about the end of May, minus a week or two here and there for various holidays and things that are going on otherwise in the CC office. And happy to bring today Eleanor Gummer and Cecile de Rosier to continue their look at music by women composers previously forgotten, suppressed, now being published and unearthed. Most of this music that you're going to hear today, if not all of it, is published by One Eye Publications, which Eleanor owns. And she's going to show you what the scores look like, how to get the music, all that kind of stuff. And today they're looking at the French connection and looking at repertoire in advanced grades. After this week, next week, we're going to go to a discussion that it seems a lot of you are interested, judging by the registrants already for that webinar, and it's going to be a discussion on teaching beginners. And so I'm going to be joined, I haven't announced this yet, but for the first time I'll mention I'm going to be joined by Marjorie Purdy, one of our CC examiners, and the two of us are just going to have a little sort of living room chat about beginners and gauge and have a little poll for the audience to see what it is about beginners you're going to want to learn. We have a whole bunch of topics in mind, and we're going to hopefully start a series where we bring in different guests to talk about different facets of teaching beginners. And I know I've spoken with Eleanor before about maybe featuring her series called Piano Kids. And so that's something that I'm going to talk to her further about, and maybe we can have her as one of our guests in that series. And then the week after that, I guess that takes us to February 3rd, Friday, February 3rd, we're going to have another little discussion about the digital badges and what they're all about. And I'm going to be joined by two CC examiners, Alessandra DiCenzo and Liz Craig, and we're going to talk further about the digital badges and try and get you all excited about what that means. So in the meantime, I'm going to turn this over to Eleanor and Cecile. In the meantime, keep your eyes on your inboxes for more emails in the coming weeks about the series and other news at CC. And Eleanor, Cecile, thanks for joining us today. Happy New Year to you both. And we look forward to hearing what you have to say today.
Thank you, Derek, and Happy New Year to everyone out there. Before we get started on the French connection, something that's bothered me for a long time is how on earth did pianists play some of these works? Thinking back to 100 years and beyond that, people were smaller in stature, and so how did they manage to play some of these pieces and multiple octaves? So I did a little bit of study on it, and Naotaka Saki produced a document actually in 2008 where he researched the size of keys, and they actually ranged from 156 millimeters to 188 millimeters in size. So that's significantly smaller than our piano today. I measured mine and I checked on the Yamaha website. Today's pianos are 23.5 millimeters in width. So compare that to 188 or even 156 millimeters. That's a huge difference. So it was actually much easier to play octaves, multiple octaves, and chords. So the pianos today date from the 1880s, and were designed to suit concert venues and large-handed male virtuosos. So there you go. If you're wondering why you struggle to play Chopin, and certainly when researching the women composers, how did they play these pieces? There's your answer. So let's move on. And Cecile, you're going to tell us about Mel Bonis.
Mel Bonis. Yeah, we're starting today with 3 pieces written at the end of the 19th century by Mel Bonis and then Cécile Chaminade. And curiously, it's 2 cavats and a minuet. So those are, of course, Baroque forms, Baroque dances. So the question is, why would Romantic composers write Baroque dances at the end of the 19th century? Those forms had disappeared a long time ago, and they came back. So when I started doing research on that period in France, I was surprised to see the number of minuets, rigodons, gigs, courantes, bourrées. I would also find pieces that would be romantic, with lots of pedals, but with titles evocative of the 18th century, of the French court of Versailles, of Louis XIV, and even Marie Antoinette was coming up regularly, becoming very popular. So it was more music, romantic music, kind of nostalgic of bygone days, bygones, old way of living. I even found a few pieces for harpsichord at that time, from that time. So obviously there was a clear renewal of interest for the music of the past in France, harpsichord music. So why that new trend? Well, I found that it was due in great part to the Paris International Exhibition of 1889 that was put together to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the French Revolution. That's the same exhibition where Debussy and Ravel discovered the music and the instrument of Asia, of North Africa and Central Africa. That was to have such a big influence on their writing and on their topic, their sources of inspiration. So that was a major event that brought together musicians from all over the world. And that happened for the first time. So the visitors there, as well as the composers, discovered new sounds like the gamelan, different harmonies, different scales. And we know the impact it had on Debussy and Ravel because there have been studies made on them, but it had an impact on the musical world of France, a big impact. It was tremendous. It opened up the music world to music of the world, basically. And suddenly you see exotic descriptive titles evocative of faraway countries appearing, the attraction of traveling. So Mel Bonis and Cécile Chaminade were also stimulated by that exhibition, by that effervescence that was happening around them. So in their output, we find titles like for Bonis, Oriental, Les Gitanes, for Chaminade, Danse créole, Orientale, Chanson d'Orient, Chanson russe, and many more. For the late century French people, and it's a quote here, the past is also a foreign country. So they discovered, the two were linked, and so they discovered the music of the world. At the same time, they were rediscovering their own music from the past. So apparently, and I saw pictures of that, and it's really, they're really stunning. There was an entire pavilion where visitors could discover a collection of string and wind instruments, as well as keyboards, harpsichords, clavichords, from the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, the 17th and 18th century. And they heard concerts played on those instruments. So it was a big eye-opener, you know. The harpsichord was rediscovered. Apparently, Marie Antoinette's harpsichord was on display, which in my mind, I went, whoa, okay, that's why suddenly she became popular. That's why I was finding pieces describing her or describing her life, or there was even a suite about her. And I thought, well, she wasn't so popular in 1789, right? And there were three makers who built harpsichords for that event. So the French, because of that, they rediscovered those forgotten sounds, those forgotten dances, and it gave composers new sources of inspiration, starting a new trend that was obviously very, very strong. And both Melbonis and Chaminade adopted that trend very successfully. So the first piece I'd like to show you, it's marionettes. So puppets, you think, well, we talked about Melbonis before. We talked about early pieces from the Album pour les tout petits, but she wrote pieces for all levels, from beginners to professional. So Marionnette is at the level 8 in the syllabus of Conservatory Canada. And her style is late romantic, impressionistic. She studied at the Conservatoire de Paris in the same classes as Claude Debussy. And their composition teacher, Ernest Guiraud, wrote that they were by far the best students of his class. So yeah, she's romantic, going on impressionist, but here she clearly turned to the 18th century for inspiration. So marionette, you think puppet shows that were very popular in France at that time. We're not talking here Commedia dell'arte, we're not talking clowns, more about a scene from an 18th century court where you see people dancing. The gavotte, the French gavotte, has a connection with Jean-Baptiste Lully and Louis XIV. So we're talking late 17th century. So here it goes. You see how it goes. So this is I find a similarity. It's a gavotte, and I find a similarity with the box gavotte from the French suite number 5. Now, what's a gavotte? And she follows all the characteristics. It's a French origin. It's in 4/4, but it feels in 2. You have a pickup. It starts in the middle of the bar. And it's moderately fast, happy, and you have the rhythm quarter note to eighth notes that comes regularly. The first question that arises when looking at it, it's not only staccato, it's the wedges. So I think the first question from a student would be, what do they mean? And it means staccatissimo, like very short and percussive, which of course contributes to the feeling of happiness. It says exaggerated staccato with energy, choppy, distinct. All that technically, it's our motion. You know what I mean? To get that precise sound, it's hand, wrist, arm working together as a unit. A movement of the wrist, and I mention that because I see that quite often with my university student, a floppy wrist. Like if you do this, I mean, the wrist is in the way. You don't get that crispness that you need. So you have to think, I tell them, keep that quiet, it's not working. It's upper arm, that's work, that does the job. She has interesting contrasts in dynamics that are very Baroque, forte, piano, but with that romantic touch of a slight crescendo. So it's a mix between the two eras, the two style, two point of view. It's Baroque music from a romantic perspective. Question, ornaments, you have the trill. Those fancy on the beat or before? I heard both. Personally, considering what I saw in other pieces and the fact that it's so melodic, I would have a tendency, I would do them before to make sure that they come out clearly. But as an examiner, both would be acceptable and fine. The accents starting bar 9, when you have the C, I would think them weighty, and a little bit of rhythmic pedal would help to have a nice sound. So you don't want anything, percussive there. A suggestion, once we were talking about the size of the keys. I don't know if you see bar 25, 26, when it goes, places like that, where the right hand has to move up. I would pick up the note with the left hand to make it easier. Those are things that you can do to make the playing, the jumping, the moving easier. There's an interesting section, totally contrasting with the 16th. That's all staccato. So again, it's hands quiet, arm staying close to the keys. There, I find that it really helps to play notes together, play chords. See what? So you learn the handprints, and it makes the playing much easier. And of course, you work on that with rhythms. That helps. You work at the same time on the physical memory, learning the handprints, the oral, and the analytical. You can see, okay, this is that chord. This is this one. It changed here. Later, you get into broken octaves. short staccato. Again, play them together and arms. I find that those pieces are very well written with the pianist in mind, from a pianist point of view, because you go from finger technique to wrist. Sometimes you have things like that, and sometimes it's arms. So the students learn to distinguish, okay, to think what's the best way, the most effective way to play something. And the fact that these jump from one to the other means that you play those pieces and you don't get tired. There's so much variety. You get the, for example, bar 42. You have that accompaniment in 8 notes. Make you think of the Alberti bass. And the last point that comes to mind here, it's the pedal. Of course, it's romantic. You play the piano, you use the pedal, but it's Baroque dance, Baroque inspiration. So the pedal has to be very sparse, very little. The sounds are always clear and precise, most of the time evocative of the harpsichord. So I use the pedal to link notes. For example, at the beginning, rhythmic pedal. Where, like I said earlier, to bring out to give a nice sound to those long C's. So basically, that's it. You think rhythmic pedal. Another place would be, I would do a little bit rhythmic pedal on the first and third beats to just bring out the melody a little bit. So the next one would be the Menuet, Opus 14. That one was written in, see, the Marionette was written in 1899. This Menuet was written in 1889, I find, the year of the exhibition. It's a minuet, but it's very lively and it has a funny side to it. It's a little bit of a pastiche, caricature. It's a Baroque dance, but definitely from a romantic perspective. You find also the staccato, the wedges. So same thing, same way of doing it technically. One challenge is the move of the left hand. And keeping the sense of direction of the phrase. I find that I make my students work like, especially here, just the fifth finger. So another place where it happens is at the bottom, the last line. You have a melodic line in octave. And I'm working on that. I'm mentioning it because I'm working on that with the students. It's, you have a line, you have to keep the direction, a 2-bar sequence. So your physical movement have to be in sync with your musical intent. So you have, if you move in between, it's gonna sound choppy, and we're gonna lose that line of direction. So this has to stay quiet. And again, it's not stiff, it's not working. The fingers are firm. And you have that circular motion that makes you go down lower. There's a tricky passage, the fourth line, when you do where the fingering really has to be addressed, and the student will have to try different things and see what works best for him or her. Pedaling, there's again, you know, when you have the, there, it's all written in the left hand, but it makes it tricky, I found, to come in with a, so I would have no problem dividing those octaves between the two hands. The pedal, again, it's sparse. I would use it to bring the accents. And for example, bar 8 and 9. The syncopations and the pedal really comes into play. The romantic 49. And see, we have the same kind of ornaments than in marionette there, but here it's clearly before the beat. So if you're interested in that, and then of course there you need the pedal to connect everything. And it's, I would do one pedal a bar, change, change, and then one, and you go back to it. So it underlines the harmonies. If you're interested in that, by that type of repertoire, the mix of Baroque and Romantic elements, Melanie Bonis wrote other pieces inspired by the Baroque era. They're all in, there are 3 in at the level 9. The Rondeau dans le genre ancien, also written in 1889, the Bourrée and the Pavane that are just beautiful. Cécile Chaminade wrote a lovely gavotte. Also, at the end of the century, yeah, it's in the Album des Enfants. goes into the left hand. Again, it's a lovely piece, very happy. You go from legato to staccato touch. The articulations are really interesting. Same thing, gavotte falls in two, starting with a pickup. This 16th note, finger technique, they needs to be clear and precise. You play with rhythms. Yeah, there's nothing, I like to, as much as possible, play notes together so that the hands are as quiet as possible. You just try to be as efficient as possible, as little movement to get the maximum result. You learn to, you train yourself to be kind of lazy in that way. There's a bit of chromaticism, but mostly it's the dynamic contrasts that are really interesting. The pedal will add colors. Again, very little to underline the accents. Like, for example, the ending of the first phrase, bar 8. So it sounds more posé. The accents, rhythmic pedal there. And then, of course, at the end, you have the marcato at the end of that section, where you want the melodic line a bit more connected. Yeah, those I find also, I've had a few students in the past who were not so keen, let's say, to work on Baroque pieces. It was not their bag, really. And but those are great pieces to for them to learn about dances, Baroque dances, to have a connections with that style, but it's still, it's closer to how they want to express themselves, basically. Some students have really strong ideas about repertoire. I've had students, the opposite, who came to me and wanted to work only on Baroque repertoire, but you got the opposite also. Some students who are very romantic in their choice of repertoire. So that's a great option that works very well with many students.
I think something you see from all these composers is they were teachers. So the music has great pedagogical value, and it's very appealing to students.
It is. That's it. And like I said earlier, the fact that they use different ways of creating sounds, fingers, wrists, arms, it becomes easy. The students have to think, okay, I need that type of sound. What's the best way to create that? Oh, it's finger here. It's arm. If I do this playing the melodic line in octaves, it doesn't sound too good. They have to think about this, and physically, the fact that they switch from one set of muscles to another, to the focus is here, the focus is there, and they think, they move, the brain move from their fingers to their arms, and physically they learn to delegate, and they don't get tired at the end. It's very satisfying, rewarding. You feel good.
Absolutely.
And it's happy music.
Absolutely.
And now we're moving to two other pieces by Chaminade, different inspiration, different sources of inspiration.
So Cécile Chaminade was born in 1857 in Paris to a musical family. She began her studies at an early age and continued privately at the Paris Conservatory, where she studied piano, violin, and composition. Her father believed that young ladies should not receive formal education, so she had to study privately. She experimented with composing as a child, where she wrote for her cats, her dogs, and her dolls. She performed some of her works for Georges Bizet, who was very impressed with her talent. In 1878, with the support of Le Coury, her composition teacher, Chaminade gave a salon performance entirely of her own pieces. For the rest of her career, she performed only her own works. She was admired for her beautiful technique, virtuosity, and her astonishing mastery of harmony. So, after several years of success, she had to deal with serious economic issues. Her father made some bad investment, and the family's estate was drastically reduced. She decided to increase the number of her performances and focused her time and energy on composition. In her lifetime, she wrote over 200 works for the piano. She toured France in her early years. In 1892, she debuted in England, where her work was very popular. Queen Victoria was one of her biggest fans and awarded Chaminade the Jubilee Medal in 1897. During her tours in Europe, she founded Chaminade clubs, where people were invited to listen to her repertoire. A number of clubs were also created in the US, and she was very popular in Canada. She married a music publisher from Marseille in 1901 who was much older than her. They never lived in the same house, and he died in 1907 from lung disease. In 1908, she performed in 12 cities in the US, and her works were a huge success. Despite her success as a performer, she was never accepted as an equal professional in Paris. Her music was written off as salon music, more suited to be played at home rather than the concert hall. The New York Evening Post has this review of Chaminade's 1908 Carnegie Hall performance. But on the whole, this concert confirmed the conviction held by many that while women may one day vote, they will never be able to compose anything worthwhile. In 1913, she was elected a Chevalier of the National Order of the Legion of Honor in France, a first for a woman composer. In 1912, she began to deal with health issues. She stopped composing after her mother's death, sold her property, and left Paris. She spent the rest of her life in her house near Toulon and her niece's home in Monaco. After a few years later, her health deteriorated again, and she lost her left foot. World War II amplified her tragic destiny, and her financial situation became critical. She lost most of her royalties after her Jewish publisher was liquidated by the Nazis. She died in Monaco in 1944. So I was first acquainted with Chaminade through the flute concertino, and then discovered her toccata opus 155 while looking for repertoire for an associate level student. I tried to find a published copy of it and couldn't, so I did some research on this composer, and she was a woman. So I never in my wildest dreams did I think that Chaminade was a woman. So that was a real eye-opener, and I really have loved her music ever since. So I'm going to play the air de ballet for you. It's a level 6, as was the gavotte Cécile played. charming piece with some really great pedagogical elements. The left hand has these chords. If you play them with a down wrist, they become very. So here it's important I like to lift off them, float off them, and use just a touch of pedal. Now, what I love is the crescendo at the end of line 1 to the forte, and then piano on the top of the phrase. But what's interesting is if you'll notice the slur from bar 7 to bar 8, the phrase ends here, but the slur continues on. So she obviously wants the music to move forward. The B section, which begins at bar 17, or the pickup, love the harmonies in that section, and there I would pedal each bar, but also pressing a little harder on the top notes of those chords to maintain a clear melody. On the second page, the melody moves to the left hand, with very light chords. They're actually marked leggero in the right hand. So it's a balance of hands throughout, careful pedaling, beautiful dynamics, and phrase shapes. So really a charming piece at the level 6. Then there's also a romance. And let me pull that up. Okay. So the romance, and this is a level 10, very different character, very emotional piece. Theme returns. There's a pesante section that follows. a beautiful piece for an emotional grade 10 level student. Now, what's interesting here is she indicates the pedaling really in a very similar way to what Debussy did. I'll see if I can notate this. So if you'll notice the long sustained note here in the left hand, it's impossible, of course, to play, to actually hang on to the D while trying to play the G. And that's how Debussy indicated pedaling, but also Chaminade is indicating pedaling in the same way. So basically, wherever here, for example, you would pedal for the duration of the whole bar, change here, and then lift for the rest. And here you would hold and then change on the F. So that was sort of an interesting way of indicating pedaling without actually using the actual pedal marks. Her dynamics are extreme, so nothing at the beginning, but she marks it on molto sostenuto, and then we get to fortissimo in line 3, and then down to piano in bar 12. This really carries through the whole piece. Let me move on to the next page. There we go. So here, this is the third page with the pesante section in the middle. If you notice here at the beginning of the third page, it's the same as the opening. The opening is marked molto sostenuto. Here she marks a dolcissima. When it comes back another time at the very end on the fourth page, it's dolcissimo with a triple piano marking. And to play triple piano is extremely difficult. However, there's a little trick you can do on a grand piano with the una corda pedal. When the hammers hit the strings, eventually there are indentations in the hammers from hitting the strings. You get these little grooves in the hammers, and you can see it on a grand piano. If you shift the una corda halfway, you end up, the hammers hit the strings in between those grooves. So you're playing on the fluffier part of the hammer, and it gives you a more muted sound. It really changes the whole color of the instrument. So for that triple piano, I would definitely suggest a half una corda. So that would make it really effective. The melody bounces back and forth between the right hand and the left hand. So there's a lot of voicing. The performer has to be aware all the way through exactly where is the melody line, or is it being played in unison. For example, on the third page here, line 3. So in a lot of the piece, the two hands are in unison. Bottom of that page, definitely top notes, and then down a register, mezzo forte, and then a further crescendo. So she's very, very specific about dynamics, but they are extreme, which really makes it a fantastic work to teach and to play. We'll move on to another composer, and that's
Charlotte Sohi.
Yes, and Cecile, do you want to tell us a little bit about Charlotte?
Yeah, I can tell you a bit about her. She was born in 1887 and died in 1955. So I read an article last week written by Christophe Huss, who's a reviewer, a music critic in Montreal, and he was reviewing recent CDs of work by women composers. And he wrote that Charlotte Sohi was his most important discovery. And he had been listening to her symphony that had just been recorded. And I think, to my knowledge, there had been other chamber music recorded, but there's no recording of her piano works yet. We have access, and they're not available apart from those 6 pieces, but I'll talk about that later. So she wrote music of all genres, from the piano sonata to opera. She wrote that symphony, Symphony of the War, I think it's called. Melodies with piano or with orchestra, chamber music, 35 opuses in total, so around 40 works. Her father was an engineer. She was very precocious, and the parents saw her talents and they encouraged her to develop her talents in the arts. And that meant not only music, but also literature and theater. She wrote plays and she wrote a novel also. She was a friend of Mel Bonis and Nadia Boulanger, and she studied with the Schola Cantorum with Vincent d'Indy. So that was the competing school, the other school with the Conservatoire de Musique de Paris. She married another composer. They met when they were both students at the Schola Cantorum. His name was Marcel Labbé, and they got married in 1909. They had 7 children. Both appreciated each other's work, which was quite rare when you look at the bios of many composers. They collaborated together. Marcel conducted works by Charlotte. Charlotte wrote the libretto for Marcel's opera. They worked together at constant exchanges. They were very supportive of each other, and they also organized regular concerts. And they were highly regarded in the arts milieu in Paris. They were part of the cultural elite there. Her music, she was really well-known, recognized. Her music was played by Maurice Ravel, Gabriel Fauré, and Paul Dukas. Her style now, is very expressive. We can say it's neo-romantic. At times, the colors can make us think of Debussy, but her language is always very original, shows great sensitivity. And I was trying to find the words to explain that. There's a mastery in a control in terms of writing. Like, she has very original ideas, and the way she puts those ideas together is it's going to be often new and different, and you think, oh my God, how could she think of that? She always keeps you on the ball. Now, after her death in 1955, her works stopped being published, and nothing had been recorded until recently. And when we say recently, we're saying a fall of 2022. Her symphony right now is getting great acclaim. Her grandson, François-Henri Labbé, who's also a musician, he was the director of a conservatoire in France for many, many years, and has retired now. He has been working on the inventory of the manuscripts and the published works of his grandparents. And his grandmother, Charlotte, died when he was still a child, but his grandfather died when he was an adult. So he obviously had a close relationship with him. So he started with the idea of working on the manuscripts and on the works by his grandfather. And then he found the works of his grandmother, and he saw the interest in them. And he said now that he has more requests for her music than for his grandfather music, which is something he didn't expect it when he started working on their works in the 1970s. It takes time. It's still an ongoing work. It takes time. He was saying that his work had been made more complicated because of the multiple names and pseudonyms that she had been using. As the milieu became, let's say, less open to women composers, in the 1920s after the First World War. We're going to show you 3 excerpts from the 6 petites pièces published in 1921. I want to mention that we're really lucky to have access to them, to be able to play them and teach them because they're delightful. And Eleanor included them in the volumes 2 and 3 of the collection, the Woman Composers collection. They were published last year in 2021, exactly 100 years after the first publication. And the timing could not have been greater. Eleanor had the nose there as the changes in Canadian copyright laws just last December would make that impossible now. So, Eleanor, you're starting with Enfant Sage?
This is a level 5 piece. So what I love about this piece, the first phrase is in the major key, but then in bar 5, the second phrase, into the minor, then back major, minor. So she fluctuates back and forth between the major and minor modes, which really gives it color. To play this, the left hand is accompaniment all the way through with the repeated, the ostinato G in the accompaniment throughout, almost exactly throughout the piece, and then a bass line. So, but the melody is in the right hand. So teaching this, I would suggest fairly flat fingers in the left hand to maintain control, because and staying in contact with the key for those repeated G's, because if you lift off the key, again, it becomes difficult to control the sound. So very close to the keys in the left hand, but the right hand, firm fingertips. To make that melody sing out. I love her sense of the slurs. If you look at the last line, actually, let's take it from bar 13. So dropping into the first note, lift, drop, lift, drop, lift, drop, lift, drop, and finish. So a very gentle wrist motion to make sure there's a singing tone on the first note of each, the first note of the slur, but it really lends to a very charming piece. Another one I want to play for you is Au Soleil. And this one's very different in character. that music. There, oh, there we go. Okay, so to me, this lends itself to really telling a story, perhaps a family outing to the beach. The excitement in that, and perhaps playing hide and go seek at bar 17. And so on, and then on the second page, sorry. Playing in the waves, and then a big diminuendo, and slowing down. They're getting tired, and then one weave. So time to go home. And then much slower at the ending. So you can imagine the children just being exhausted after a day at the beach. But it lends itself very much to storytelling. So the left-hand chords, again, not coming down on the chords, which would create heaviness, but thinking up, 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 and very active fingers in the right hand to get that sparkle in the tone. In line 2, it's the opposite. The left hand has a melody. So you want those right hand chords to be light and an active left hand to project the melody. Yeah, so again, very colorful, a fun piece to play at a level 7. And then Cecile, you were going to talk about Au Matin?
Au Matin. It's another storytelling piece. You can see the scene. It's really beautiful. Sorry, I'll do that again. So very lyrical. I was playing that, and at the beginning, I feel that it's like very early in the morning. The sun is coming up, and I was thinking it must be a Sunday because you get to the that sounds like a chorale music that reminds me of a church service, Sunday service. The melody is lovely. What surprised me at first was the phrasing. you get the slur, but underneath you get more details on the articulations. So yeah, you get the slur over the first bar, but you get the and what I find is that it gives more definition to the direction of the phrase. The going up and going down. But it's still very singing. And I find really interesting the way she changes the accompaniment. At first, it's one, da dee da, da dee da, da dee da. So it's not stable. It's and then later you get that the broken chords that make it indeed more stable. And then changes the register here, there. And so, okay. Also, bar 13, interesting chords. You have the that needs to stay in the pedal. So you get that. And then again, you have notes grouped by 2, 2, and then 4, 2. So the rhythm, the pulse is very clear, and I find that very effective musically. Going from, you're in 4/4, and going from 4/4 to 6/4 with the chorale passage makes a big contrast, and it's very interesting musically also. I find interesting use of dynamics, especially towards the end. You get the piano, but the inner voice is forte. And you have those long notes. You're back in 6/4. Those long notes that have to stay in the pedal. So it creates a very, very interesting effect. So that's what I meant, when I was talking about she has original ideas. You see things in her music that grab your attention that you don't see with other composers. Different ways of working with the dynamics and with the phrasing. So another composer to discover.
And more music to discover. It's so tempting to just get set in a certain way, and I just find it's a lot of fun to discover new music and introduce students to new music, and it makes for great recitals, great music for exams or competitions because they're playing something different.
Yep.
So we'll be back on February the 10th. This time we're crossing the continent and the channel over to England. So all hail Britannia, and this is going to be music for the earlier grades. So we'll see you on February the 10th.
Okay, Eleanor, Cecile, thanks so much for joining us today and giving that wonderful presentation. It's great to hear the advanced music. You both give us such a great model to play from too, and remind us of all sorts of neat habits, both out loud in your verbiage and also subliminally. With your playing is coming through really beautifully and sensitively. And it's just amazing to hear the stories and hear about all this music. So I'm sure on behalf of everyone that's present here today and everyone that watches in the future on CCTV YouTube channel, we appreciate all the thought and work that goes into this. And this will certainly give us, I could hear all sorts of titles that I would want to explore with my advanced students. So thanks for that. Thanks, everyone. Are there any questions? I don't see anything in the Q&A that's popped up or the chat box. If anyone has any last minute questions here, feel free to type them in madly or raise your hand and we could bring you on live if you had a question to ask of Eleanor and Cecile. Otherwise, we have a date, I believe, for that next webinar that you've just mentioned, and that'll be on February 10th, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Jack, if any viewers watching afterwards ever have questions, can they contact you and you forward it to us?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the best way to go.
Yeah.
If people like, I've also put a link to One Eye Publications in the chat box a little bit ago for anyone who wants to go straight to the website and see Eleanor's publications, not only a lot of music by women composers lately over the last year and a half that she's published, but also the Piano Kids stuff, which again, we hope to feature later in the year.
There's going to be some more music coming out, hopefully next week or the week after.
What do you have there coming out to be published?
The Sonatina by Langens. Really a beautiful work, intermediate level, but a beautiful work. So I'm just working on it right now. Hopefully to go to print next week or the week after at the latest.
Awesome.
She was a close friend of Brahms. They grew up together. They were studying with the same teacher, and they were exchanging all the time about their compositions. And then Brahms moved, and they reconnected years later as adults when she moved back. She went to study with Clara Schumann. So it's the same generation.
Interesting. Okay.
Working on a collection by Hedwig Chrétien of work. So there's so much beautiful music. It's like what's going to go into the collection. And again, they're more intermediate to advanced level pieces.
But I just love that sonata.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, I look forward to seeing it as well. I know I have a lot of that music here, and I enjoy playing through it when I get a moment to sit down and sight read. And just so everyone knows, all of this music too, we have found a way to put it into the classical piano syllabus. The latest round of updates isn't quite there yet. I've had to flush those files out due to a couple of other errors in the syllabus that I found, but hopefully in the next couple of weeks, I should have the latest round of new music up there by women composers, so that everything you're hearing here is also available for students to do on exams already. And we have it graded for you so that you can have an idea of where that might lie with your students. Okay, so thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Hopefully we'll see you next Friday. We'll see Eleanor and Cecile again in a month on February 10th. Have a great weekend. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, that was fun.
It was for me. I mean, I think we're a good team.